welcome back to week 3 of Sweep Up the Middle Fantasy Football Podcast. It's your boy Mitchell Ryan checking in. Hoping y'all are having a good Wednesday night here for me, about midnight, checking in for y'all, doing these podcasts, cranking them out for y'all, so hopefully y'all can appreciate that. But yeah, what a boring week for week 2. There was not a lot of games, and the ratings are showing that too. I mean, you have the Cowboys, the Broncos, not that good of a game, the Falcons and the the Packers on Sunday night, not that good of a game, and then the Giants and Lions on Monday night, not that good of a game. So hopefully week 3 can bring us more entertaining games, fantasy-wise. Hopefully, you're where you need to be. Doing pretty decent in my leagues, 3-1 right now in 2 leagues, so I can't complain. So hopefully everybody's having some good vibes for y'all out there, and hopefully the rest of your season goes good. But yeah, let's jump into it. Hopefully week 3 brings us some better games and some better enjoyment as a football fan. And the big one I want to start out with, and I started out with him last week too, was Derek Carr. He's going against the Redskins. Carson Wentz had 300 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Redskins week 1, and Derek Carr's on fire. So that's an easy start for me. Let's move on. Matt Stafford versus the Falcons. Stafford proved himself last week in more ways than none, rather than just fantasy football, but he's here to stay as a legit quarterback. He might not be worth that much money at $27 million guaranteed, but he facilitated that offense. He moved around in the pocket. He went against a top 5 defense, in my opinion, the Giants, and he came out with a win. So going against the Falcons, Vic Beasley will be out, so I think the pass rush is going to be weaker, and he balls out at home. He has 26 touchdowns and 5 interceptions the last 12 games. So I like Stafford at home this week against the Falcons. And then my last one, Cam Newton versus the Saints. I went with Newton last week against the Bills. I think the rust was going to fall off a little bit, but he was still a little lackadaisical. But I think going against the Saints this week will really help him. The Saints have allowed the most passing yards and fantasy points to quarterbacks this year. So for me, that's an obvious start for Cam. I think he gets in. I think he has a big game this week. Going to the sit-ems, I've got Jameis Winston versus the Vikings. In Minnesota, it's a tough place to play. Breeze only had 15 points this year against him, and they only averaged 12 points last year at home. So I would avoid Jameis Winston this week, as well as Russell Wilson versus the Titans. Look, that O-line's beat up. He's a 20th ranked quarterback, and it's a road game. So that's just a recipe for disaster. I'd look other places. Then we'll go to running backs. My big start of the week is Carlos Hyde versus the Rams. He had 124 yards against Seattle, and the Rams have given up the most rushing yards this year. So I think Carlos Hyde really continues that trend. I also think he adds some PPR in there that brings a lot of value to the standard PPR league now. Javorius Allen against the Jags. He went off last week for 20 points, I believe. He leads the Ravens backfield in snaps at 75 and touches at 40. And the Jags have allowed over 20 points to running backs this year. So Javorius Allen against the Jags is a good start this week. My last start this week, James White going against the Texans. I think with Danny Amendola being injured, Julian Edelman being injured, Gronk being banged up a bit, not playing for the rest of the third quarter halfway through on, Tom Brady is going to throw the ball to the people we trust in big time. And James White proved himself last year in the Super Bowl, so I believe that they're going to score against the Texans. And I don't think it's going to be 1 or 2 or 3 yards, the goal lines of Mike Gillislee. I think it's going to be 5 yards out. So I think that tends to lean in James White area for touchdown and PPR overall value. So for me, James White's a big start this week. Then my sit-ems, I've got Leonard Fournette versus the Ravens. They're going to London. Blake Bortles is your quarterback, and the Ravens are a top 3 defense right now. So that's trending all for me to just avoid Fournette. Hopefully he might have 30 yards and a touchdown to maybe save a little, but I believe that he's not going to have a good week this week. Then Redskins running backs versus the Raiders. Look, whether it's Samaje Perine, Kelly, or Thompson, the Raiders have allowed only 4 points in your PPR scoring. So for me, the Raiders are too good of a defense no matter who it is. I think they're going to be playing from behind anyways, but going against the Raiders, so I would avoid all Washington running backs this week. And then wide receiver stardoms. I went with Doug Baldwin last week. He let me down, so I'm going to go with him again against the Titans. The Titans have allowed the 5th most PPR points to receivers at 40 points per game. So it's all there for him. Again, Russell Wilson is a sit-em for me. However, I think that being PPR, you can heavily rely on targets, and I think Baldwin's going to get the majority of those. My next one's Terrell Pryor versus the Raiders. We're waiting for him to break out. He signed the big contract, and everything's leading to that for him. I think the recipe for success is there because he leads their snap percentage in 78% and targets at 15. And I believe they're going to be playing from behind against the Raiders, like I said, already with the Redskins. So the big one for me is Terrell Pryor, start him, target machine. And last one, Kelvin Benjamin versus the Saints. I already have Cam Newton going off for one of my stardoms. And the Saints have allowed the most PPR points to wide receivers at 46. Again, Cam balls out. Kelvin Benjamin has a big game. Start Kelvin Benjamin. Now I got a couple sit-ems for wide receiver. We're going to go DeAndre Hopkins versus the Patriots. You do not want to go against a Bill Belichick team as the top target for the opposing team against Belichick because he will single-handedly take you out of the game and make you use your other pieces. For them, I think they'd rather have Lamar Miller being checked down all day rather than DeAndre Hopkins running a fly route going over the top. So I think they double down, put hands on DeAndre Hopkins. I think he has a single-digit game this week. My next one's Marvin Jones versus the Falcons. Yes, he's had 2 touchdowns this year, 1 in each game, but he's only averaged 32 yards per game, and he's only had 7 targets this year. So going against a Falcons team and defense that's going to have Trufant shadowing him, I just think that's a tough matchup when I look elsewhere for my wide receiver 2 or flex position. Next, we're going to go tight ends. And look at this, baby. Jason Witten versus the Cardinals. He's the number 1 fantasy tight end right now, and he has the most targets and catches for tight ends. He is beating Father Time right now. He has the most starts for a Cowboy, most catches. He is just adding the record books up, and he is having a great year. I think in large part we were playing from behind too last week, and he was a dump down machine. But that's PPR. That's what you live and die with sometimes. So again, the Cards allowed 15 points to Jack Doyle last week too. I think Jack Doyle's on the rise, but it's still 15 points. So that's a good amount for your tight end. Kyle Rudolph versus the Bucks. Yes, I had him as a top tight end last week, but that was before I knew Sam Bradford was out. So he was going with my boy Keenum, Abilene, shout out. But yeah, I think Kyle Rudolph, even though he had 8 points last week, he was on field for 95% of the snaps, and he had the most targets at 6. So the production's there. Like I said, he has chemistry with Sam Bradford, specifically in the red zone. So for me, a big start this week's Kyle Rudolph because he still is going to get the majority of the snaps and majority of the targets as well. And I already mentioned him once, but Jack Doyle versus the Browns. He had 8 targets to him last week, and he caught all 8. And he had 15 points last week too, so that's a pretty good margin. And the Browns have had NFL high of 19 catches against tight ends towards them. So no matter who's playing quarterback for them, I still believe he's going to get targets, and he's definitely a start this week. My 2 sit-ems, pretty big names. Tyler Eifert versus the Packers. One of the main reasons he's dealing with injuries to his back and his knees. He's only had 5 targets in 2 weeks as well. The Bengals haven't scored a touchdown this year too, so going against Packers at home in Lambeau with a solid defense at times. Yes, they played the Falcons last week, but that's the Falcons. That's one of the best offenses in the NFL. So I believe they get back on track, and I'd avoid Eifert for injuries and just no production out of that Bengals offense. And then Antonio Gates. For me, a sit-em, probably for the rest of the year. Think about dropping him. He broke the tight end record at 112, so we'll give him congratulations for that. But the fact of the matter is he only had 4 catches for 28 yards this year, and Hunter Henry had 7 for 80 last week. So I think they're slowly going to start phasing Hunter Henry into the number 1 tight end position. He might have a big game here and there, but that's not something you want to rely on. There's a lot more meat on the bone for other players out there. So I would say, if not, definitely sit. If not, drop Antonio Gates. Defense, stardoms, easy for me. Patriots versus Texans. Again, I already talked about Bill Belichick singling out DeAndre Hopkins, holding him to single points. You also don't want a rookie quarterback going against Bill Belichick, the defensive mastermind himself. So, rookie quarterback against Patriots D is never a recipe for success. And I believe that the Patriots D will get out of the negativity of average of -3 points. So I definitely start the Patriots this week against the Texans defense, and then Packers versus Bengals. As I mentioned, the Bengals have a terrible offensive line. They have not scored a TD this year. They don't look good. So again, Packers versus Bengals start. And then D's, couple sits. Big one, as I mentioned, Texas versus Patriots. The fact of the matter is, I've already said it, I think the Texans offense is going to put the defense in a bad spot, and if you give Tom Brady field position, he's just going to eat you up. So with that being said, easy sit for me, the Texans, and they're going against Brady. So that's a pretty easy one for me. And then another one, Cardinals versus the Cowboys. For me, I think the Cowboys are going to play really, really pissed off with a chip on their shoulder come Monday night, which is going to be in my bold predictions I don't want to give away. So just save that one. But for me, I would totally avoid the Cardinals versus the Cowboys. And then bold predictions last week, I said Gronk would go for 20. He went for 23 in 2.5 quarters. He looks like he's going to play this week too, so that's good. But yeah, I checked that bold prediction off, and then I said Alex Smith would have less than 15 points. I was close. He had 16. So I'm going to chalk that up as a win for me too. He had 30 the first week, and everybody was raving that he's not going to be his typical self. Slow down, don't drink the Kool-Aid. He came back down to earth at 16. So let's continue to watch that, see if he trends back up at all. But I'm going to count 2 for 2 last week. And a couple bold predictions this week. As I mentioned, I think Zeke and Dez both go for 100 yards. So Zeke will have 100 rushing yards and Dez will have 100 receiving yards. I don't care how good the situation looks, but that's the reason why I'm willing to sit the Cardinals D. I say the Patriots running backs do not have a rushing touchdown. So I'm specifically targeting Mike Gillislee here because I feel like the Patriots are going to do all their damage from outside the 5, maybe that around the first and goal around the 9, 8, 10 yardage range. So I believe that they will not have a rushing touchdown this week, but you could see a couple PPR. Actually, it's bold predictions. Let's do it. You're not going to have a rushing touchdown from the Patriots this week. However, you're going to have 2 PPR catches, touchdowns from running backs this week. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in to the Sweep Up the Middle podcast, week 3 of fantasy football here. A lot of great information coming your way. Hope everybody has a great week. Feel free to reach out to our Facebook and Twitter page at SUTM Podcast, any questions you have. And you can also go to mitchellryan21.com/SUTM to get most recent rankings, fantasy trade analyzers, just a lot of great content. So again, mitchellryan21.com/SUTM. Click here to subscribe to my YouTube page, as well as clicking here to watching the most recent SUTM video. Again, thank you so much. Always shout out to NFL Network and ESPN for the great stats. We'll see y'all next week. Adios. Mitchell Ryan, checking out.